Hi Jose, so this is the video, the vlog for answering the questions that you asked us, that what is real and if can you change reality, what is true and how can you be sure that something is true, and what is free and if anyone is really free and how free is free enough. Okay, so first of all, the first question that was if what is real and how can you change reality, I asked both my brother and my mother, and what my brother answered was that the most rigorous approach that can be made to reality is that of objectivity, as a variable close to reality, starting all from the assumption that reality is something that cannot be properly determined. From the mathematical point of view, the concept of reality is something completely different, having real and imaginary numbers, since both exist but both are not necessarily real. The preference to restrict yourself to the mathematical notion about reality is what my brother thinks, that or anything material that can be quantifiable under a real number. And from the non-material realm, he had like a preference of not getting into that part, since from the material point of view, much could be explained as chemical reactions within the body, making them real. So taking under reality the mathematical notion, it can be changed by a function that starts from a set of real numbers to a different set of real numbers. This notion can be extended towards the abstract notion of reality, where human beings are agents who take the role of functions that have the power to change reality from one state to another. So for this same first question, what my mother answered was that reality is being built all the time. So it is not changed but rather built and can be oriented according to what you want or have the will to do. Because without will, basically nothing is done, and that in that moment it would depend completely on the outside world. So when I came to understand and listen to what they both were saying in this first question, I understood that I was also very in agreement with them, because it is understanding that reality isn't something that we can really manipulate and that we can really understand, because we ain't sure of everything that is happening, of anything at all that is happening. Therefore, we can see it from the mathematical point of view, as my brother mentioned, but also from the point of view that my mother mentioned, that is the one I had thought of before, which is that reality can be constructed towards what someone wants. Maybe not in that exact moment, but an idea, the will of someone that is willing to do something to get to that point, to get to build that reality, that is something that will make that reality a fact. And that's why I really am in agreement with this, with both their points of view being both really complete and really debatable, because this is still something that isn't defined, but it is a debate that's been going on in the present from way past. Okay, so basically for the second question, that is basically what is true and how can you be sure that something is really true, what my brother answered was that basically in the moment of speaking about truth, an important division must be made between a priori truth and a posteriori truth. Why? Because an a priori truth is a logical conclusion or result determined from the rules of logic, and a posteriori truth, on the other hand, is one that can be corroborated by facts. So for something to be confirmed as true properly, it must meet the two conditions mentioned before, to be able to be classified as a priori truth and also as an a posteriori truth. Okay, so for this same question of what is true and how can you be sure that something is really true, well, what my mother answered is that basically what is true for the observer may have different interpretations, therefore giving sometimes an interpretation that can change the initial reality of another person who is receiving the information in that moment. So basically that almost everything is interpretation. Okay, so now when it comes to my interpretation of things, to my personal opinion about this same question, I really agree completely with them, and I think what they say is a completely detailed and more precise information about what I had already been thinking. So first of all, it is that what I had been thinking was that reality isn't something that you can really just define, because the reality can depend on each person and how he perceives different things, about the subjectivity of a greater scheme of things. But it is also to understand that whether I think something and whether another people think something else, there is a reality that for both of them must be true, whether or not we perceive it as that way, as what is really happening, but that is what it is. So it is also like to understand that when my brother mentioned the a priori and a posteriori truth, that complements much more that from the logical conclusions and from the facts that determine and that support what is happening, and also from the way of what my mother says. I think that it is also really true that everything can have different interpretations. So what I can see may be different for someone else, but if I, with what I see, with what I perceive, influence that other person, that other individual, that person can change what they initially thought. So when you speak about reality or truth in a subject way, it is something that it is completely variable. But when you speak about it in a more general, in a greater scheme of things, it is something that must be happening and that is happening inevitably, whether one thinks it like that or no. Okay, so finally, for the last question, the question that is basically, what is free? Is anyone ever really free, and how free is free enough? Well, basically what my brother first said is that in order to understand this, he understood freedom from the notion of Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum, who understand this as a corollary of capability. So an individual is free to the extent that he has the ability to do things according to his wishes, to what he wants really to do. In other words, freedom can be understood as a desire to subject to power. So there are two types of power, political and economical, and they are those that mostly restrict the freedom of an individual in a free market society. In a society with strong state control, it is no longer economic power and political state, but the state itself that restricts the freedom of the individual. Therefore, an individual who lives in society will never be free, since it is with this freedom that he pays for the benefits of living in a society under a social contract. And for the last part, he said that my freedom goes as far as the freedom of another one goes. You know, like not involving myself, my actions, into what someone else is doing. So that is basically what my brother's opinion. Basically, what my mother said is that no one is really free. That it depends on each one how free is free enough. Because what for some people may be enough, for others it may be too little. So enough can even vary with the circumstances, the emotional state, the mood. So enough would be that what allows you to feel balance and satisfaction with your action, with the things you're performing on your day-by-day basis. So that is basically what my mother thinks. And so basically what I have to understand about this third and last question of what is free, is anyone ever really free, and how free is free enough? Well, I have to say that I am in agreement with what both they said, as well as the other two questions, because I think it is always something that depends on the person who is perceiving that reality, who is living under those circumstances, and how he reacts towards the things that happen to him. I think personally that what freedom really is, or how can a person be really free, it would depend on the way he acts and he reacts toward the actions that occur around his environment. And in this is when I have to also involve some of what my mother said, because she said that it can vary according to the circumstances, the emotional state, the anemical state. So it is understanding that it isn't always what we want to do, nothing is always what we want it to be, but it is our decision to interpret and to act according to what is happening to us in a way that can benefit our own satisfaction, our own capability of doing what we want to do. And this is the last part, when I also have to mention what my brother said, what my brother mentioned, because it is also really true that an individual living within a society will always have restrictions, will always have some limits which he cannot overcome, even if he wants to, even if that's what he wants to be capable of doing, because the economical and the political powers are something that subjects everyone towards that thing, and towards even not thinking of something you may be, or you may want, or may have wanted to do, if you were not influenced from those powers from the beginning of your life. So now, as a conclusion, I want to say that basically I am really in agreement with everything that they say. Why? Because it is same thoughts as me, but in a more precise and kind of different way of what I had been thinking and how I was thinking that. And it is to also understand that there will always be topics left over to treat and to speak about, to debate in these kind of things, in speaking about freedom, about truth, about liberty, about reality. But it is to understand that as far as that it could extend, this is information that could extend as far as we want it, and are willing to make it grow. Because in this moment, I also, when I was debating with them, I also understood that every perception of every person is different, but may point towards the same end. And that is what I think happened in this moment, in this video, with my personal experience when making this kind of interviews. But I also think that in a general scheme of things, you could say that every one of these questions can be taken from a subjective point of view, but also with a more general point of view, with what is really happening, what isn't irrefutable that is happening, because it is known that it is happening, whether or not we perceive it as that is, as what that is. And that applies also to freedom, to what each person experiences and how each person lets and reacts to those different things that occur in their environment, living according to their thoughts or not living according to their thoughts, in the case of them not meeting their liberty or their freedom. So thank you, Jose, this was all, and I hope you enjoyed.